Bigfoot vs. Hell's Angels, North Grass Valley Road, San Bernardino National Forest Chapter 1. Unsettling rumors. The evening had just settled in the town of San Bernardino. A dense mist hovered over the roads, obscuring the night and hiding the sleepy houses behind a thick veil. But away from the town's tranquility, past the sleepy homes, and deep within the forest, a single flickering light illuminated a circle of leather-clad bikers, the San Bernardino crew. Reed, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a dark beard, tapped his fingers against his bike's chrome handle, the light from the campfire reflecting in his sunglasses. "All right, everyone gather round. We've got some planning to do." The members, one by one, shuffled closer, the air thick with anticipation and the smell of gasoline. Among them was Jay, a wiry man with a penchant for gossip. He leaned toward his friend, Danny, and whispered, "Have you heard the rumors about this place?" Danny, a man known for his calm and stoic demeanor, glanced around before replying, "You mean about the missing hikers?" Jay nodded vigorously, his eyes wide with excitement. "Not just them, there are talks about creatures." "Enough with the fairy tales," Danny interrupted, although a hint of unease clouded his eyes. "We're here for business." The crew's conversation was hushed, but the whispers about the mysterious happenings in San Bernardino National Forest had traveled much farther than the confines of their camp. Tales of eerie silences, disappearing campers, and bizarre sightings had been fodder for many local gossip sessions. Still, for most of the San Bernardino crew, these were just stories, rumors to scare off outsiders. Reed cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the matter at hand. "We're meeting the Vegas crew here tomorrow, right at dawn. Everything needs to be seamless. No room for mistakes." Laura, a sharp-eyed woman with fiery red hair, pulled out a map, spreading it on a makeshift table they had set up. "The exchange happens here." She pointed to a marked location, North Grass Valley Road, where it meets the 173 Secondary. Eli, another crew member with tattoos trailing up his neck, nodded in agreement. "It's remote. We've done our recon. It should be easy, in and out." "But what about the rumors?" Jay couldn't resist but asked, glancing around to gauge reactions. The question lingered in the air, and several members shifted uncomfortably. Reed, noticing the unsettled feeling settling in, decided to address it. "Look, every place has its legends. This forest is no different. We stick to the plan, do the exchange, and get out. No exploring, no heroics." Danny smirked, "And definitely no hunting for mysterious creatures." Jay, slightly embarrassed but undeterred, added, "Just saying, it wouldn't hurt to be extra cautious." The fire crackled, sending a flurry of sparks into the night. The dense canopy of the forest around them seemed to absorb all other sounds. For a moment, the crew was surrounded by an eerie stillness, the weight of the legends pressing down on them. Laura, ever the pragmatist, broke the silence. "We'll take shifts tonight. 2 at a time. I don't want any unexpected surprises." Eli chuckled. "Afraid of the boogeyman, Laura?" She shot him a sharp look. "I'm not afraid of legends. I'm wary of real-life threats. Vegas crew isn't exactly known for their punctuality or their trustworthiness." Reed nodded in agreement. "Laura's right. We remain vigilant tonight. We've heard the stories, but remember, the only creatures we need to be wary of walk on 2 legs and don't always have our best interests at heart." As the night deepened and the crew settled into their routines, a dense fog rolled in, engulfing the trees and making the forest's edge mere shadows in the night. The stories, the legends of the forest, whispered through the leaves and echoed in the distance. And somewhere, hidden deep within the heart of San Bernardino National Forest, something watched, waited, and listened. As dawn approached, the campfire had reduced to embers, and a sense of unease settled over the crew. With the crucial exchange just hours away, the boundaries between rumor and reality would blur, setting in motion a series of events that none of them could have ever foreseen. The forest, with its dark secrets, was awake, and the crew, despite their bravado, were mere players in its ancient game. Chapter 2. The meeting point. Dawn's first light was but a faint smear against the dark expanse, illuminating the Grass Valley Junction just enough to see the mist shifting like restless spirits over the tarmac. The San Bernardino crew, their engines idling in a low growl, waited in a loose formation. The anticipation was palpable. You could feel it in the very air, taut like the string of a drawn bow. From the north, the distant rumble of motorcycles echoed long before they were visible. The Vegas crew. Their approach was heralded by the piercing beam of headlights cutting through the murk and the growing roar of their engines. They rode in, their formation tight and disciplined, like a flock of predatory birds. And then, silence, as engines were killed, and the two crews eyed each other in the dim light. Reed greeted a tall man from the Vegas crew, his voice gravelly. This was Vinny, the leader of the Vegas bunch. His black leather jacket bore the distinctive 81's insignia, a sign of loyalty and brotherhood. Vinny, Reed nodded, his face impassive. The two leaders, though bound by a common purpose, shared a history. A history that neither had forgotten. As members from both sides began to dismount and stretch, exchanging guarded nods, the weight of the unsaid hung heavily between Reed and Vinny. "Let's get this done," Reed finally said, his voice betraying a hint of impatience. A brief nod from Vinny was all it took. Two members from the Vegas crew moved forward, revealing duffel bags. Lara and Eli approached cautiously, their own bags in tow. But amidst the transaction, a flicker of movement on the ridge caught the eye of a younger biker from the San Bernardino crew. Squinting against the dim light, he tried to focus on the form. It looked like an animal? But its size and stance were all wrong. "Hey," he called out, pointing, "you all see that?" A few heads turned, straining to see. But the tension between the two groups meant that most were more focused on each other than on some distant shadow. "It's probably just a deer or something," someone muttered dismissively. But the young biker, perhaps eager to prove himself or simply too curious, wasn't about to let it go. Pulling out his handgun, he aimed in the direction of the figure and fired. The shot echoed, amplified 100-fold by the quiet of the early morning and the surrounding trees. Birds took flight, their cries of alarm piercing the air. The consequences of that shot were immediate and horrifying. The animal, on the ridge, far from being frightened, reacted with swift aggression. With a roar that seemed to shake the very ground, it launched a massive boulder straight at the shooter. The force of the impact was catastrophic, ending him instantly. Panic spread like wildfire. Bikes were hastily started, shouts of alarm mixed with curses. The planned exchange was forgotten as every biker tried to make a hasty escape. The roar from the ridge was joined by others, creating a terrifying symphony that promised nothing but doom. Reed, his instincts kicking in, shouted orders, trying to bring some semblance of order to the chaos. "South. Everyone head south." The Vegas crew, unprepared and perhaps more shaken, scattered in different directions. The majority, including Vinny, revved their engines and sped northward. The San Bernardino crew, following Reed's lead, pushed southward. But they weren't unscathed. Massive boulders, hurled with terrifying precision, rained on them. Bikers swerved, trying to dodge, but not all were successful. Every impact, every crash echoed the forest's fury and the creature's wrath. After what felt like hours, Reed managed to find a momentary refuge, pulling his crew into a clearing. Their numbers were diminished. The realization was like a punch to the gut. But there was no time to mourn. They had to keep moving. A lone biker from the San Bernardino crew, having witnessed the Vegas crew's flight, returned with grim news. "They didn't make it," he reported, his face ashen. I saw them being chased down. Boulders. The cliff. They're gone." The weight of the situation bore down on them all. A routine transaction had turned into a desperate fight for survival. The creatures, the legends of San Bernardino National Forest, were no longer mere tales whispered around campfires. They were real. And they were angry. As the first rays of the sun pierced the thick canopy, illuminating the devastation, Reed made a decision. We need to regroup and get out of this forest. We stick together. It's the only way. His words were met with determined nods. But every biker knew, as they revved their engines and prepared to navigate the treacherous path back to civilization, that the forest had awoken. And their ordeal was far from over. Chapter 3. The escape route. The roar of engines filled the air as the San Bernardino crew raced along the forest road. Trees, still dark in the shadow of dawn, whizzed past in a blur. The sense of urgency was palpable. Every biker knew that speed was their only ally. The winding path, though familiar to most, took on a sinister quality in the tense atmosphere. Every rustle in the foliage, every distant echo seemed to herald a new danger. The bikers stayed close, forming a tight convoy, their headlights casting long shadows on the road. Suddenly, without warning, the air was filled with a deep, guttural roar, sending shivers down their spines. Before they could react, boulders rained from above. Massive stones crashed onto the path, causing bikers to swerve erratically. One boulder, the size of a compact car, landed directly in the path of two bikers. Their attempt to swerve away ended in a deadly collision, their bikes skidding off the path and into the thick underbrush. Chaos ensued. The barrage seemed endless. Reed, leading the charge, yelled commands over the din, urging the bikers to spread out, to avoid becoming easy targets. Every turn in the road became a game of chance, a desperate bid to avoid the next barrage. As they continued their frantic escape, Miguel, one of the older members of the crew and known for his tales of the forest, shouted to the others, "It's him. It's the Bigfoot of San Bernardino." Many in the crew, while having heard tales of Bigfoot, had dismissed them as legends, stories to be told around campfires. But now, the tales seemed all too real. Reed, despite the urgency of the situation, signaled for the crew to pull over at a bend that offered a modicum of cover. "We need a plan," he said, his voice tight with strain. Miguel, his face pale, began, "When I was a kid, my grandfather used to tell me tales of the forest. He spoke of the Bigfoot, a guardian of these woods. They were here long before us, and they have always been protective of their territory." A murmur of disbelief ran through the crew. But Miguel continued, "I never gave it much thought until now. But think about it. Who else or what else could launch boulders with such precision? We're not dealing with mere animals. These are intelligent beings, and we're in their territory." The crew, despite the skepticism of some, was beginning to come around to the possibility. The unexplained events, the power with which they were being pursued, it all began to fit. Reed, ever the pragmatist, cut in, "Legends or not, we need to get out of here. We can't outrun them on these paths. We need to think." Lara, who had been silent until now, spoke up, "There's an old ranger's outpost about 10 miles from here. It's been abandoned for years, but it's fortified. We can make a stand there, at least buy us some time." Reed nodded, "It's our best shot. We'll head there." The crew, with newfound purpose, revved their engines and set off. But the forest, with its unseen guardians, wasn't going to let them off easily. The path seemed to close in on them, the trees becoming denser, the darkness more profound. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a threat. As they approached the outpost, a final barrage of boulders rained down. But this time, the crew was prepared. Spreading out and accelerating, they dodged most of the boulders, though not without a few close calls. Reaching the outpost, they quickly barricaded themselves in. The old wooden structure, though worn by time, provided a sense of security. But as the sun rose higher, casting a golden hue over the forest, the crew knew that this was just the beginning of their ordeal. The legends of the forest had come alive, and the San Bernardino crew, intruders in this ancient realm, would have to fight for every breath. Chapter 4. Old wounds reopened inside the ranger's outpost. The walls seemed to close in on the San Bernardino crew. The dim light filtering through the boarded-up windows gave the room an eerie glow. Dust motes floated in the beams of sunlight, and the wooden floor creaked under the weight of the anxious bikers. Reed, his leather jacket now stained with dirt and sweat, ran a hand through his hair, pushing it away from his forehead. "We need a plan," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the small room. But before he could continue, a voice laced with anger cut through. "A plan? Your last plan got us here." Diego, one of the more hot-headed members of the crew, stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Reed. Reed's face tightened. "Diego, now's not the time." Diego spat back. "Oh, it's the perfect time. Because of you, we're trapped in this hellhole with those things out there." The tension was palpable. As Diego and Reed locked eyes, old wounds were reopened. The crew knew of the underlying animosity between the two. Years ago, Diego's brother had been set up on a deal gone wrong, and the blame had squarely fallen on Reed. Although it had been an accident, Diego had never forgiven Reed. Lara stepped between the two. "Both of you, stop it. We need to stick together." But Diego wasn't done. "Stick together? Like you stuck by my brother when he needed you." He directed the last part at Reed, his voice filled with bitterness. Reed's voice was low and controlled. "Diego, what happened to Carlos was not my fault. I've explained it 100 times. But Diego wasn't having it. You left him to rot, Reed. Because of you, my brother is dead." The room was thick with tension. Arguments broke out among the crew, with members taking sides. In the midst of the turmoil, a loud crash echoed through the outpost. Everyone froze. A boulder, hurled with incredible force, had smashed through one of the windows, narrowly missing Jasper, who had been standing close by. The impact had sent shards of glass flying, and Jasper was now on the floor, clutching his leg, blood pouring from a deep gash. The sight of blood seemed to snap the crew back to reality. Lara rushed to Jasper's side, pulling a bandana from her pocket to stem the bleeding. Reed took charge. "Enough. We can't fight among ourselves. Whatever our issues, we need to deal with them later. Right now, we need to get out of here." Diego, still fuming but realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded reluctantly. The crew quickly barricaded the broken window and began discussing their next move. With Jasper injured, their mobility was compromised. Every passing minute felt like a ticking time bomb, with the unseen threat outside growing bolder. Lara looked up from tending to Jasper's wound. "We need to move him. But with his injury, he can't ride." Reed thought for a moment. "We'll fashion a stretcher. Use it to carry him on one of the bikes." As the crew began gathering materials to make the stretcher, the sense of unity that had once bound them together seemed fragile. The events of the day, coupled with the unresolved tensions, had taken a toll. Trust had been eroded, and in its place, suspicion and resentment bubbled. In a quiet corner, Miguel whispered to Lara, "We can't let this tear us apart. The forest. It has a way of feeding on fear and discord." Lara nodded, her eyes filled with concern. "I know. But how do we keep the crew together?" Miguel sighed. "We need to find a way out. But more than that, we need to find a way to heal old wounds." As night began to fall, the crew huddled together, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. The forest outside seemed to come alive, with every rustle and creak heightening their sense of dread. But inside the outpost, another battle was being waged, a battle to keep the crew united in the face of unspeakable terror. And as the hours ticked by, it became clear that their greatest challenge might not be the external threat but the demons from their past that threatened to tear them apart. Chapter 5. The legend revealed as dawn broke, the forest silence was pierced by the sound of a haunting melody. The San Bernardino crew, on high alert after the night's chaos, steered their bikes cautiously toward the source. They soon came across a clearing where an old Native American man sat, his face deeply lined with age, his fingers gently coaxing music from a wooden flute. The crew approached hesitantly, their guards up. Reed took the lead, his voice respectful. "Sir, we didn't expect to find anyone out here." The old man slowly lifted his gaze, meeting Reed's eyes with an intense scrutiny. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice a low rumble. The guardians of the forest have been awakened. Why have you angered them? Diego, still harboring anger from the recent confrontation, scoffed. Guardians? You mean those things throwing boulders at us? The man's eyes darkened. They are not just things. They are the protectors of these sacred lands. Laura, intrigued and hoping for a way out of their predicament, knelt beside the man. Please, tell us more. We need to understand. He sighed deeply and began his tale. Long ago, our ancestors shared this land with the Guardians. They were peaceful, mostly keeping to themselves, but they ensured that the forest was respected and that no harm befell it. But when the settlers came, they saw the Guardians as threats, as monsters. Conflicts arose. Miguel, hanging on to every word, whispered, "The Bigfoot." The old man nodded, yes. The Bigfoot. But they were not just mindless beasts. They were intelligent, with their own customs and rituals. After years of conflict, a pact was formed between the settlers and the Bigfoot. As long as the settlers respected certain boundaries and did not defile the sacred spaces, the Bigfoot would not harm them. Reed frowned, but that was long ago. What has it got to do with us? The old man looked at Reed gravely. The pact was not just with the settlers of old. It is a living promise, one that spans generations. And you have violated it. Diego spat on the ground. All we did was make a deal. What's so sacred about that? The old man's voice was chilling. It's not about the deal. It's where you made it. The Grass Valley Junction is a sacred ground, a place where the veils between our world and theirs is thin. By spilling blood there, you've reawakened old enmities. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the gravity of their mistake. Lara, her voice urgent, asks, "Is there a way to make things right?" The old man looked at them for a moment, contemplating. There might be. An old ritual to appease the Guardians, but it's not easy. It requires sacrifice. Reed immediately stood up. Whatever it takes, tell us. We need to fix this. The man began detailing the ritual. It involved gathering specific herbs from the forest at midnight, lighting a ceremonial fire, and chanting an ancient mantra. But the most crucial part was the offering, a personal item from each one present, symbolizing their willingness to make amends. Lara hesitated. Is that all? An item of ours? The man shook his head. It's not just about the item. It's about the intent behind it. The Guardians will see through any deceit. Miguel, ever the practical one, started listing out what they would need for the ritual. We'll need to split up, gather the herbs quickly. Diego, though still skeptical, nodded. Fine, but we better be quick. Those things will be back. As the crew started preparing for the ritual, the old man held Reed back. Remember, it's not just about the actions. It's about truly wanting to make things right. The Guardians will know. Reed nodded. We understand. And thank you. The old man just stared into the distance, his expression inscrutable. As the crew ventured deeper into the forest, the weight of the legend pressed down on them. The realization that they had unknowingly stepped into an age-old conflict was unsettling. But more than the fear, it was the hope, the thin, fragile hope that they might have a way out, a way to make amends, that drove them forward. Chapter 6. Fractured Unity. The shadows deepened as the crew made their way through the dense underbrush, the eerie whisper of the wind making it difficult to hear anything else. But, out of nowhere, a guttural roar reverberated through the trees, setting every nerve on edge. Diego, ever the skeptic, began to murmur, "That's probably just a bear." Before he could complete his sentence, a colossal figure, covered in thick matted fur, lunged out from behind the trees. The Bigfoot's eyes glowed an intense amber, and its snarl displayed a row of frighteningly sharp teeth. Panic set in instantly. "Scatter!" Miguel yelled. The bikers revved their engines and sped in different directions. Lara and Reed tore off to the right. Diego and Miguel raced left, while others scattered haphazardly, hoping to lose the creature. After what felt like hours of heart-pounding evasion, Laura and Reed found themselves in a dense thicket. Switching off their bikes, they tried to listen for any signs of their pursuer or their crew members. "We need to find the others," Reed whispered, trying to keep his voice steady. Just then, they heard the soft chirping of a walkie-talkie, a tool the crew always carried. But this was not the reassuring voice of a crew member. Instead, it was the distorted sounds of interference and the occasional snippet of a terrified voice. Reed grabbed his walkie. "Diego? Miguel? Anyone?" Static filled the air for a moment before Miguel's voice broke through. "Reed? Laura? We're holed up near an old trail sign. Saw an abandoned cabin up ahead." Relief washed over them. "We're on our way. Stay put and keep the noise down." As they approached the old trail sign, they noticed the faint glow of a torchlight ahead. The abandoned cabin came into view, its time-worn walls a testament to its age and neglect. Its door creaked eerily as they entered, and the dust in the air was thick, tickling their throats. Inside, Diego was nursing a gash on his arm. Miguel was rummaging through an old wooden chest. "Looks like someone lived here a long time ago," he mused. Curiosity piqued, Laura approached the chest. Inside were various artifacts, old photographs, trinkets, and a leather-bound journal. She gingerly picked it up, the leather cracked and worn. Flipping it open, she began to read out loud. "July 12, 1897. They don't believe me. They laugh and jeer. But I've seen them, the tall creatures, the guardians of the forest. They move swiftly, blending into the shadows, but I've caught glimpses. Their roars echo in the night, chilling my bones." Diego, usually the dismissive one, now listened intently, the reality of their situation sinking in. Laura continued, her voice a tremulous whisper. "August 3, 1897. I tried to warn the town. They must not venture deep into the forest, especially not the sacred grounds. But greed is a powerful motivator. They seek the rumored gold veins deep within. I fear this will lead to disaster." Reed interrupted, "We need to let the others know about this. This is more than just a chance encounter. We've stumbled upon something ancient and vengeful." Miguel nodded in agreement. "We regroup at dawn. For now, we lay low." Throughout the night, the sounds of the forest kept them on edge. Every rustle, every distant howl had them gripping their makeshift weapons. They took turns keeping watch, ensuring the cabin remained their sanctuary. As dawn approached, and the first rays of light filtered through the cracks in the cabin walls, there was a momentary sense of relief. But it was clear, their journey through the forest was far from over. The legend of the Bigfoot was real, and the crew would need to navigate their fractured unity and the mysteries of the past to find a way out. Chapter 7. Echoes of the past. The sun hadn't risen yet, and the forest was blanketed in a pre-dawn darkness. But for Eddie Mitchell, a young lumberjack, the morning was alive with promise. It was the summer of 1957, and the San Bernardino National Forest buzzed with activity. The newly built highway was drawing adventurers, and the stories of hidden treasures made everyone want to explore the forest's deeper recesses. However, Eddie wasn't interested in any treasures. He was drawn to the forest for its beauty, its sense of mystery. Armed with his trusty axe and a packed lunch, he headed in, the chirping birds keeping him company. As he ventured deeper, a fog rolled in, dampening his clothes and muting the world around him. Soon, Eddie stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. Curiosity piqued, he decided to explore. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mold and damp. On a rotting wooden table sat an old leather-bound journal, not unlike the one the bikers would find decades later. Eddie started reading out of curiosity, the journal's initial entries mundane, detailing the daily life of a miner named William. But as he turned the pages, the entries became more frantic. "They're watching me," one entry read. "I can feel their eyes, hidden among the trees." It was clear that William believed he was not alone in the forest, that he was being watched by creatures he called the shadows of the forest. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, Eddie decided to take the journal with him, promising himself he'd return it later. But as he left the cabin, a sudden rustling stopped him dead in his tracks. Out of the fog, a large shadowy figure emerged, its eyes glowing in the dim light. Eddie felt a chill run down his spine. The creature, covered in thick fur and standing at least 8 feet tall, seemed to be studying him. Panicking, Eddie threw his axe towards the creature, narrowly missing it, and ran as fast as he could, not stopping until he reached the highway. Breathless and shaken, he tried to tell anyone who would listen about his encounter. But in an era of sci-fi and urban legends, his story was met with disbelief and mockery. Eddie became the town's laughingstock, the boy who cried Bigfoot. Years went by, and Eddie grew into a bitter old man. He rarely ventured into the forest and avoided talking about his encounter. But he always kept the journal, a constant reminder of the day the forest revealed its secrets to him. Decades later, when news spread about a biker gang planning a meeting in the depths of the forest, Eddie tried to warn them. Laura remembered seeing him at a local bar. A haggard old man, his gray hair unkempt, trying to get the attention of the raucous bikers. "You don't know what's out there," he shouted, his voice filled with an urgency that belied his age. Diego had laughed him off. "Old man, you've had one too many. Go home and sleep it off." Now, in the safety of the cabin, the journal's contents and Eddie's warnings were starting to paint a clear picture. Diego felt a pang of guilt. "We should have listened," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Reed nodded in agreement. "The past has a way of catching up, and it seems we've stirred something ancient, something we don't understand." But buried within William's journal and Eddie's warnings was hope. If they could find the heart of the forest, a sacred clearing mentioned in hushed tones, they might be able to appease the creatures. As dawn broke, the San Bernardino crew knew they had a mission: to delve deeper into the forest's history and find a way to reconcile with its guardians. Chapter 8. A frantic search. The muted daylight filtering through the trees seemed almost alien, as if the forest itself was ensnared in a nightmare it couldn't shake off. Laura, with her hazel eyes scanning every shadow, took the lead. "We need supplies, weapons, anything we can get our hands on. We're not just prey in these woods." Jackson and Reed, a pair of bikers known more for their bronze than brains, decided to branch off to the left, hoping the denser foliage might hide old hunters' cabins or traps. Laura, Diego, and the rest, meanwhile, ventured further into the forest, eyes peeled for anything that could be of use. Every now and then, a sudden gust of wind would rustle the leaves, causing heart rates to skyrocket. They knew they weren't alone. The deeper Jackson and Reed went, the more they felt the weight of the forest's eerie silence. Each snap of a twig beneath their boots echoed like a gunshot, each whisper seemed a shout. It was Reed who first heard it, a distant, guttural roar. It resonated through the trees, vibrating in their very bones. Then, a scream. Not from one of their own, but something else, something otherworldly. Jackson grabbed Reed's arm. "That wasn't a bear, was it?" he whispered. Reed shook his head, eyes wide with terror. "No bear I ever heard of." Laura and her group also heard the roar. "Back to the cabin." Diego yelled, but Laura hesitated, her ears pricked. "Jackson and Reed went this way," she murmured. Before anyone could protest, she was off, dashing in the direction of the noise. Diego cursed under his breath and followed, with the rest of the crew in tow. They ran with desperate urgency, branches scratching their faces, their breath foggy puffs in the cool air. Jackson and Reed, meanwhile, were lost. The forest, which at first had seemed so straight and clear, now seemed a twisted maze of trees and shadows. And then, as Reed turned, he saw it. Towering over them was a Bigfoot, its eyes cold and calculating, its posture threatening. Frozen in fear, Jackson and Reed could only watch as the creature took a step closer, then another. They were trapped. Jackson tried to remember the old stories, any sign of weakness, any method of distraction. Just as all hope seemed lost, an arrow pierced the air, embedding itself in a tree next to the Bigfoot, drawing its attention. Out of the shadows stepped a figure, face obscured by a hood, a quiver of arrows slung across their back. The Bigfoot, sensing a new threat, hesitated. The stranger used the momentary distraction to beckon Jackson and Reed closer, guiding them away from danger. Lara and the rest arrived just in time to see the stranger, the hood now fallen back to reveal a woman with sharp, fierce eyes and long, silver hair. "Who are you?" Diego demanded. She regarded him with a steely gaze. "The one who just saved your friends." Jackson, catching his breath, nodded gratefully. "She's telling the truth. We'd be dead if it weren't for her." The mysterious woman sheathed her bow. "My name is Arya," she said. "I've lived in these woods for longer than you'd believe. If you want to get out alive, you'd do well to listen to me." Lara, always the pragmatist, stepped forward. Then we're all ears. The forest, with all its lurking dangers, watched and waited. For while the bikers had found an ally in Arya, the creatures of the woods were many, and their memories were long. Chapter 9. Secrets of the Stranger. The trees towered around the small group, their ancient branches like arthritic fingers against the gunmetal sky. Beneath this canopy, Arya stood at the center of the crew, her features illuminated by a crackling campfire. The flames flickered across her face, revealing a myriad of battle scars and whispered tales of long-forgotten adventures. Lara took a deep breath, her voice shaky but resolute. "Who are you, really? And how do you know so much about them?" She glanced around nervously, half expecting a Bigfoot to emerge from the darkened woods. Arya let out a deep sigh, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "I am a descendant of the man you glimpsed in your flashback. My grandfather. He encountered these creatures decades ago, under similar circumstances." Diego shifted uncomfortably. "Why didn't we know about this? Why the secrecy?" Arya's eyes hardened. The world wasn't ready to believe. It still isn't. Every warning he gave, every tale he told, was met with ridicule and disbelief. Jackson interrupted. "How come you're still alive? How did you manage to avoid them all these years?" Arya smiled wryly. "I've learned their patterns, their behaviors. I've discovered what they loathe and what they fear. But most importantly, I've learned respect." She took a deep breath. "You've trespassed on their territory. They see you not as guests, but as invaders." Diego scoffed. "We're not invaders. We just want to get out of here." Arya looked at him pointedly. "That may be so, but you've already awakened the ancient guardians. Your mere presence is a violation of the old pacts." Lara's eyes widened with realization. The legend. The one about the pact between settlers and Bigfoot. Arya nodded solemnly. "Yes, my grandfather was a part of that history. It was an agreement of peace and respect. You've unwittingly shattered it." Reed, still shaken from his earlier encounter, asked, "How do we fix it?" Arya took a moment before replying. "There's a region up ahead, called the Boulder Pass. It's perilous, filled with traps set by the Bigfoot to capture intruders. But it's also the fastest way out." Jackson groaned. "More challenges, just great." Arya silenced him with a stern look. "If you perform a specific ritual, it might momentarily distract the Bigfoot, allowing you safe passage." Lara was instantly intrigued. "What kind of ritual?" Arya began to explain. "It's a ritual of appeasement and respect. You'll need certain items: a bone, a feather, and a handful of forest berries. The bone signifies the death and rebirth of the forest, the feather symbolizes the creatures of the air, and the berries represent the sustenance provided by the land." Diego, ever the skeptic, asks, "And you believe this will work?" Arya replied, "It has in the past. But you must perform it with genuine reverence. Any deceit, and the Bigfoot will see through it." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. It was a desperate plan, but their options were limited. Diego stood up, determination flashing in his eyes. "We need to find these items before nightfall." Arya nodded. I'll guide you. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, the gravity of their situation weighed heavily on them. The ritual was a beacon of hope, but the path ahead was fraught with danger. The Bigfoot, with their keen senses and intimate knowledge of the terrain, had the advantage. But with Arya's guidance and the crew's newfound determination, they would confront the ancient guardians head-on, seeking both escape and redemption. Chapter 10. The ritual night fell upon the forest with a cloak of impenetrable darkness. The crew gathered in a clearing, the moonlight barely penetrating the dense canopy. The centerpiece of this makeshift sanctuary was a roaring fire, its flames leaping hungrily towards the heavens. Jackson held a time-worn book, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. "Are we really sure about this?" he whispered, doubt evident in his voice. Arya stood next to him, a figure of calm amidst the brewing storm. "It's our only chance," she responded, her voice barely above a whisper. "We perform the ritual and hope for a reprieve." Diego, always the pragmatist, chimed in, "Let's get this over with. If it doesn't work, we move at first light." One by one, they formed a circle around the fire. Lara began drawing symbols on the ground, each one intricate and laden with purpose. She used a mix of ash and crushed berries, a deep crimson hue that contrasted starkly with the dirt. Arya took a deep breath. "Once we begin, we must not stop. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, the circle must remain unbroken." Nods of understanding rippled through the crew. Reed, nervously clutching a bone and feather, asked, "What do we do with these?" "Place them in the fire, one at a time," Arya instructed, "then join hands." With a shaky hand, Reed tossed the bone into the flames, causing them to flare up with an ethereal blue light. Moments later, the feather followed, and the fire responded with a fiery dance of red and gold. Arya signaled Jackson to begin. He cleared his throat and started chanting from the book, his voice echoing eerily through the trees. The crew repeated after him, their combined voices forming a symphony of hope and desperation. The words were foreign, ancient even, yet they rolled off their tongues with a surprising ease. Hours seemed to pass, but the forest remained silent save for their incantations. No howls, no roars, just an uncharacteristic stillness. As the first light of dawn threatened to pierce the horizon, Lara finally spoke. It worked?" Diego, always cautious, held up a hand. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Just then, Reed, who had taken the role of lookout, perched on a tall branch, called out, his voice laced with fear, "You need to see this." The crew rushed to his position, and what they saw left them paralyzed. On the horizon, silhouetted against the emerging sun, was a gathering of massive creatures, their numbers far exceeding anything they had seen before. The Bigfoot stood still, watching, waiting. "It's... It's a council," Arya whispered, her voice betraying a hint of awe. "A what now?" Diego exclaimed. Arya, her gaze still fixed on the distant figures, explained, "It's a gathering. An assembly. They're deciding our fate." Lara swallowed hard. "What can we expect?" Arya took a deep breath. "I don't know. This is unprecedented. All we can do is wait." The crew watched, a mix of fascination and terror, as the Bigfoot Council convened. The silence of the forest was palpable, broken only by the occasional whisper of leaves and the collective breath of the crew. Jackson, in a bid to lighten the mood, quipped, "Quite the audience, huh?" Reed shushed him. "Not the time, man." As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the clearing, a lone Bigfoot, larger and seemingly older than the rest, stepped forward. Its gaze was fixed on the crew, its intentions inscrutable. Arya whispered, "The elder. The leader." The crew held their breath, waiting for a sign, a gesture. Would it be peace or wrath? Redemption or retribution? The elder raised its massive hand, palm open, and then let it fall. It was a gesture, a sign. But its meaning was yet to be understood. And as the council slowly retreated into the depths of the forest, the crew was left with more questions than answers. The ritual had been performed, the offerings made, but their fate still hung in the balance, leaving them with a foreboding sense of unease. Chapter 11. The Boulder Pass. The morning sun shed a pale light over the dense forest, its rays not quite reaching the ground, yet illuminating a path that would lead the bikers through the treacherous Boulder Pass. Jackson had heard tales of this narrow canyon, a death trap with its jagged rocks and unpredictable terrain. But they had little choice but to go through it if they were to avoid the Bigfoot that seemed to be everywhere. "We need a strategy," said Diego, scanning the looming entrance to the pass with a calculating eye. "This is their territory, and they'll use it to their advantage." Reed's voice trembled slightly. "You saw what they did with the boulders back there. We won't stand a chance." Lara, ever the brave one, revved her bike's engine. "We're not sitting ducks. We have our bikes. We use their speed." Arya nodded in agreement. "We stick together, no heroics. Our strength is in numbers. If we're separated, we're vulnerable." The crew spent the next few minutes discussing their plan of action. It was decided that they would travel in a staggered formation, with Jackson and Arya at the forefront, leading the way. Lara, Reed, and Diego would follow close behind, ready to fend off any threats. The engines roared to life, echoing ominously through the canyon walls. As they ventured further in, the walls seemed to close in on them, casting deep shadows and making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Suddenly, a loud rumble resonated throughout the pass. The crew looked up to see massive boulders tumbling down from the cliffs above, thrown with immense force by the unseen Bigfoot. Jackson swerved left, narrowly avoiding being crushed, while Arya accelerated, dodging another rock by mere inches. Reed, caught off guard, was thrown from his bike as a boulder crashed into it, leaving him pinned underneath. Diego, with a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, managed to lift the rock off him, but it was clear Reed was badly injured. "We can't stay here," yelled Lara, pointing ahead to where more boulders were gathering, poised to strike. "We push through." And push through they did. The next hour was a blur of chaos, adrenaline, and terror. The crew, relying on their expert biking skills, managed to weave, swerve, and accelerate through the deadly rain of boulders. Their bikes, powerful and agile, were the only thing standing between them and certain death. But not all made it through unscathed. Diego, in a bid to save a falling Lara, took a hit, his bike crushed under a massive rock. Though he was unhurt, his mode of transport was rendered useless. "Go on without me," he shouted over the roar of the falling rocks. "I'll find another way." Jackson, seeing an opening in the distance, shouted back, "We'll regroup on the other side. Stay safe." With a final burst of speed, the crew made it out of the pass, their bikes battered and smoking, but still functional. They paused, catching their breath, their bodies shaking from the adrenaline rush. "We lost Diego," Reed panted, his leg bleeding profusely. "We haven't lost him," Arya replied fiercely. "He's smart. He'll find his way to us." Lara, looking back at the pass they had just navigated, whispered, "We made it through Boulder Pass. We can make it through anything." But even as they celebrated their victory, a low, guttural growl echoed through the canyon, a reminder that their ordeal was far from over. The Bigfoot were still out there, watching, waiting. The crew would need to stay vigilant, for the forest held many more dangers, and their journey was far from over. Chapter 12. Broken trust. A weary pallor had settled upon the crew. Hours felt like days, and the relentless pressure of their pursuit had worn them ragged. The group had camped near a small clearing, a flickering campfire at its center illuminating tired faces. Their supplies, once abundant, were now critically low. They'd rationed the last of their food and water, but what was meant to last a day or two at most needed to sustain them far longer. "Why the hell didn't we pack more?" Reed hissed, rummaging through the packs. "We prepared for a simple trade, not a damn survival expedition." Lara, nursing a sprained wrist, shot him a withering look. Maybe if someone hadn't led those creatures directly to our meeting point, we wouldn't be in this mess. Jackson, ever the peacemaker, tried to intervene. Look, we need to keep our heads. Turning on each other isn't going to help. Arya, always observant, had noticed a shift in one of their crew members. Ever since they left the Boulder Pass, Ronnie had become distant, constantly fidgeting and avoiding eye contact. What's on your mind, Ronnie? She probed. He hesitated, looking trapped. Nothing, I'm just tired. But Arya persisted. You've been acting off. If you know something, spit it out. And then, like a dam bursting, it all came pouring out. I knew. I'd heard the stories, but I never believed them. Ronnie's voice trembled, eyes welling up with tears. My grandfather. He told me about this forest, about the guardians, but it all seemed like fairy tales. I thought it was just to scare the kids. The group's stunned silence was palpable. Jackson was the first to respond, his voice low and dangerous. You knew about the dangers of this forest, and you said nothing? Reed's rage was instant. Because of your damn secret, Diego might be dead. He roared, lunging at Ronnie. The two men grappled, fists flying. The campfire's light painted a chaotic dance of shadows as the others tried to intervene. In the ensuing chaos, a knife was drawn, its blade glinting menacingly. Arya, trying to separate the two, shouted, "Enough." But her warning was lost in the turmoil. Then it happened. The knife found its mark, and with a horrifying realization, Ronnie slumped to the ground, blood pouring from his side. Reed, wide-eyed and panting, still held the knife, the weight of his action settling in. The crew was frozen, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Their unity, once unbreakable, was shattered. Jackson, face ashen, finally spoke, his voice trembling with rage. You killed him, Reed. Over what? A damned secret? Reed, dropping the knife, backed away, horror evident in his eyes. I didn't mean to, I didn't mean to. Arya, kneeling beside Ronnie, whispered a silent prayer. We're fractured, broken. What chance do we have now? Lara, ever practical, broke the heavy silence. We can't stay here. Those creatures, the Bigfoot, they'll be drawn to the blood. Gathering their few belongings, the crew, now fewer in number, continued their journey, each lost in their thoughts. The forest around them seemed more menacing than ever, but it was the darkness within their ranks that posed the most significant threat. Chapter 13. The whispering trees. The forest, once a backdrop to their journey, had turned from passive observer to an active participant in their nightmare. As they ventured deeper into its grasp, the canopy overhead became so dense that it felt as if they were traversing through an endless twilight. The world here was eternally dusky, with the faintest rays of sunlight struggling to filter through, casting ghostly patterns on the forest floor. Reed, now an outcast within the group, trailed behind. His mind was consumed with guilt, and the shadows seemed to whisper his sins back to him. Each rustle of the leaves, each subtle creak of the ancient trees, felt like an accusation. We're not alone, Lara muttered, clutching her makeshift spear, her eyes darting around. Jackson nodded in agreement. It feels like the forest itself is watching. There was no sign of the Bigfoot, yet the sensation of being observed was more oppressive than ever. Paranoia tightened its grip on them, making every shadow appear as a threat, every sound an omen of doom. As night enveloped them, the forest's whispers grew louder, no longer ignorable. What at first seemed like the wind rustling the leaves took on a more sinister tone. Words, or fragments of them, seemed to dance on the breeze. Trespassers, punish, leave. Arya, her nerves frayed, tried to convince herself it was her imagination. It's just the wind, she muttered, though her voice lacked conviction. But as the moon reached its zenith, a new horror unveiled itself. One by one, ghostly figures emerged from the trees, apparitions of men, women, and even children, their forms translucent and their faces twisted in anguish. They moved silently, save for the soft, mournful whispers that accompanied their procession. Lara, her bravado crumbling, whispered, "Who are they?" Jackson, his voice choked with fear, responded, "The forest's past victims, maybe." The specters seemed drawn to the crew, surrounding them. They made no move to harm, but their very presence was a chilling reminder of the countless souls who'd ventured into this forest and never emerged. One apparition, a man with a ragged beard and sorrow-filled eyes, approached Reed. He pointed at the bloodstain on Reed's shirt, a grim testament to Ronnie's demise, and then to his own heart, where a similar stain marred his ethereal form. Reed, his guilt-given form, collapsed to his knees, his cries echoing through the trees. "We need to keep moving," Arya urged, pulling Reed to his feet. "If we stay here, we'll join them." But navigating through this haunted forest was no easy task. The apparitions, though silent, obstructed their path, herding them towards an ancient grove. Here, the trees were even older, their bark gnarled and their roots sprawling, forming intricate patterns on the ground. At the grove's center stood a massive tree, its trunk wide enough that it would take several people hand in hand to encircle it. Carvings, faded with age, adorned its base, depicting scenes of rituals, sacrifices, and gatherings. This was a place of power, reverence, and, as they'd soon discover, a portal between realms. As they neared the tree, the ghostly figures began to fade, their whispers growing fainter. But before they vanished completely, the bearded apparition who'd confronted Reed stepped forward. Placing his hand on the tree, he mouthed a single word, the meaning clear even without sound: "Remember." The crew, though exhausted and shaken, realized they'd been given a reprieve, a brief respite from their relentless pursuers. But the message of the apparitions was clear. The forest held memories, scars of the past, and they were now part of its haunted tapestry. Chapter 14. Sanctuary or Trap. Beyond the grove, the forest seemed to thin out, the oppressive feeling momentarily lifting. The crew pressed forward, the weariness in their bones urging them to find a safe place to rest. After hours that felt like days, they emerged from the tree line and stumbled upon a sight none had expected: the remnants of an old village. Huts, made of timber and stone, lay scattered across a clearing. Overgrown pathways hinted at a community that had once thrived here. At its center was a grander building, possibly a meeting hall, its wooden pillars still standing, though weathered and worn. It was eerily silent, save for the wind gently rustling the leaves. "We should be careful," Lara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it doesn't feel right." But Reed, his exhaustion evident, countered, "It's shelter, and right now, that's what we need." The group hesitantly agreed, and they began to explore the village. It soon became apparent that this settlement had not been abandoned by choice. Signs of struggle were evident: overturned furniture, belongings scattered, and here and there, ominous dark stains that spoke of violence. Jackson, ever the historian, observed, "It looks like the settlers here faced the same terror we're up against." As they searched for a suitable building to bed down in, Arya stumbled upon a diary, its pages yellowed with age but writing still legible. It belonged to a woman named Eleanor, and as Arya skimmed the entries, the village's tragic history unfolded. Eleanor wrote of a flourishing community, built by those who wanted to be one with nature. But as the settlers delved deeper into the forest, they awakened something ancient and wrathful. Whispered legends of the Bigfoot turned into terrifying realities. Night after night, the village was besieged by the creatures. The entries grew increasingly frantic until they abruptly stopped. Lara, looking over Arya's shoulder, muttered, "They didn't stand a chance." The sun's descent cast long shadows across the village, and the crew decided to bunker down in the meeting hall. The doors were barricaded, and a watch rotation established. But as night draped itself over the village, the eeriness that they had felt upon arrival intensified. A soft thud outside. The faintest hint of a shadow moving past a window. Whispers, too low to discern words but filled with anguish and pain. The sounds of the village's last, fateful night played out like a macabre orchestra. Reed, on watch duty, felt a chill creep up his spine. He strained his ears, trying to pinpoint the sounds. Was it the wind playing tricks, or was the village reliving its tragic end? Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the night, coming from one of the distant huts. Reed signaled to the others, and they gathered, weapons at the ready. Jackson, his voice trembling, whispered, "We need to find out what that was." Laura, clutching her spear, nodded. "We can't let our guard down." The crew ventured out, each step measured and cautious. The night was pitch black, the stars hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. As they neared the source of the noise, the air grew colder, the whispers louder. They found the hut's door ajar, and inside, remnants of the past came alive. Phantasmal figures, much like the apparitions they'd encountered earlier, reenacted the village's final moments. The spectral image of Eleanor, clutching her diary, stood out. Her eyes, filled with terror, met Arya's. A silent plea. As the crew watched, frozen in place, the phantoms faded, leaving behind an oppressive silence. It was clear. The village was not the sanctuary they'd hoped for but a trap, ensnaring them in its haunted history. The realization hit them hard. "We need to leave," Reed said, urgency in his voice. "Now." But as they turned to make their exit, a guttural roar echoed through the village, chilling them to the bone. The Bigfoot had found them. The village's past was about to become their present. Chapter 15. The elders' tale. The ground beneath their feet trembled with the force of the approaching Bigfoot. The crew, their backs to the grand meeting hall's door, faced a horrifying choice: head deeper into the village's ghostly remnants or risk an encounter with the very real menace outside. Suddenly, a strong hand grabbed Arya's arm, pulling her into the shadows of a nearby building. The rest followed suit, Reed being the last, casting wary glances toward the surrounding darkness. The grip led them to an underground entrance, skillfully concealed beneath fallen leaves and debris. A moment later, they were inside a dimly lit tunnel. Their savior, a tall, weathered Native American with silver hair cascading down his back, regarded them with piercing eyes. "Quiet now," he whispered. As they huddled, listening, the enraged roars of the Bigfoot grew distant. Arya finally broke the silence. "Thank you. You saved our lives." The old man nodded. "You are not the first outsiders to awaken the forest's wrath, nor will you be the last." "Who are you?" Jackson asked, curiosity replacing fear for a moment. "I am Nahini, the last guardian of this village. The last of the line tasked with preserving the sacred balance between man and the creatures you call Bigfoot." Lara stepped forward. "We met someone earlier who warned us of these woods. Was that one of your ancestors?" Nahini smiled. "Not an ancestor, child. That was me." Silence descended upon the group. Reed cleared his throat. "Why have you chosen to reveal yourself now?" The guardian sighed, sadness evident in his eyes. "The spirits of this place were disturbed by your presence. The phantoms you witnessed were trapped souls, unable to move on. Yet there is still hope. A way to appease both the spirits and the Bigfoot. But first, you must understand the story of this place." And so, as the crew sat in rapt attention, Nahini began his tale. "Long ago, before this land was divided by boundaries and titles, the Bigfoot and our ancestors lived in harmony. They were seen as keepers of the forest, and we respected their dominion. An ancient pact was formed, a symbiosis. They would ensure the abundance of the forest, and in return, we would offer them tributes, ensuring they remained undisturbed." Jackson, notebook in hand, scribbled furiously. "What changed?" "Progress," Nahini said bitterly. "The settlers you read about in Eleanor's diary arrived with dreams of making this place home. We tried to warn them, but they, intoxicated by the forest's allure, ventured deeper and awoke the dormant rage of the Bigfoot. In their blindness, they had broken the pact." Reed looked up. "And our coming here has done the same?" Nahini nodded. Your intentions may not have been malicious, but the forest remembers. Every tree felled, every river polluted, every mountain mined, it all disturbs the sacred balance. Arya, clutching the diary close, spoke up. What can we do? How can we set things right? The old guardian, retrieving an intricately detailed map, laid it before them. There is a path, one that can lead you out of the forest. But it will not be easy. The Bigfoot, sensing your desire to leave, will pursue. And there is one final challenge awaiting you at the forest's edge. Lara studied the map, her finger tracing the winding route. What is this final challenge? Nahini hesitated. It is a test of heart and intent. Only those pure of purpose can pass. Remember, the forest does not seek revenge, it seeks balance. Reed nodded. We understand. Thank you, Nahini. The guardian rose, leading them to the tunnel's entrance. Go now, and may the spirits guide your path. As the crew emerged from the underground, dawn was breaking. The village, though still haunting, seemed less menacing in the light. The roars of the Bigfoot had subsided, but their presence loomed. Equipped with Nahini's map and his tale echoing in their ears, the crew prepared to embark on their most perilous journey yet, determined to restore the balance they had unwittingly disrupted. Chapter 16. The cursed lake. The thick canopy finally broke open, revealing a vast expanse of still water, its surface gleaming under the high noon sun. The lake, surrounded by tall pines, appeared as a mirror reflecting the sky. It was a breathtaking sight, an oasis amidst the dense, suffocating woods. This is it, Arya said, unfolding Nahini's map. The midpoint of our journey. Reed gazed across the tranquil waters, lost in thought. It's too quiet, he murmured. Jackson, ever the history buff, cleared his throat. Legend speaks of this lake. They say its waters are cursed. Disturb them, and you awaken what lies beneath. Ah, come on, scoffed Alex, the crew's daredevil. It's just water. What's the worst that could happen? Arya shot him a warning glance. After all we've been through, you still want to tempt fate? Nahini warned us, Lara whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. There are reasons for these legends. But Alex was never one to heed warnings. With a mischievous glint in his eye, he took a few steps back, made a show of stretching, and ran headlong towards the lake, diving into its clear waters with a loud splash. The group's protests echoed around the lake, followed by a tense silence. The water's surface rippled outward from where Alex had entered but soon returned to its serene state. Alex's head popped out, his grin visible from the shore. See? Nothing to. Suddenly, a dark shadow emerged beneath him, a waterlogged, humanoid creature with elongated arms and piercing yellow eyes. It moved with predatory swiftness, its fingers grazing Alex's foot. Arya screamed, her voice echoing across the lake. Alex! Swim back! The rest of the crew watched, paralyzed with fear, as Alex thrashed, desperately trying to avoid the creature's grasp. Every stroke he took was countered by the creature's agile maneuvers. It was playing with him, toying with its prey. Reed's survival instincts kicked in. We need to distract it. Grabbing a large rock, he hurled it far to the left of Alex. The splash drew the creature's attention for a split second, enough for Alex to gain some distance. Jackson, diving into his bag, pulled out a flare. We might be able to scare it off with this, he shouted, igniting the flare. The bright red light illuminated the water around them, casting an eerie glow. Lara, seeing a nearby canoe, motioned for Arya and Reed to help. We can reach him faster with this. As the trio frantically paddled towards Alex, the creature, momentarily disoriented by the flare's light, doubled back, its yellow eyes locked onto the canoe. Reed, positioning himself at the canoe's front, held out his oar. As the creature lunged, he thrust forward, momentarily warding it off. It recoiled, its scream a guttural, haunting sound that sent shivers down their spines. Arya reached over, grabbing Alex's arm. Come on. He clambered into the canoe, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with terror. It touched me. The creature, recovering from its surprise, circled the canoe, its intent clear. But with each of its attempts to overturn them, Reed countered, using the oar to keep it at bay. Lara paddled furiously, steering them back to shore. Jackson, seeing their approach, readied another flare, its bright glow sending the creature deeper into the lake. The crew, once safely ashore, collapsed in relief. Alex, shaken and pale, whispered his thanks. Reed, his face stern, confronted him. "Your recklessness could have cost us, Alex." I'm sorry." Nahini's words echoed in their minds. The forest didn't seek revenge, it sought balance. And in that moment, they all understood the price of their actions. The lake, once a symbol of serenity, now harbored a lurking threat. The crew had to move on, ever wary of the perils that awaited them in the shadows of the forest. And as they journeyed deeper, the lake's waters returned to their calm state, the creature disappearing into its depths, waiting for the next unwary soul to disturb its sanctum. Chapter 17. The final stand. The forest grew denser with each step, shadows casting eerie patterns on the ground. But through breaks in the trees, they could see it, a mountain range, signifying the boundary of the cursed forest. Hope coursed through the crew. "We're almost there," Arya whispered, her voice quivering with exhaustion. But Reed knew better. "They won't let us leave without a fight." The crew decided to set up a defensive perimeter. Using makeshift tripwires and barriers made of logs and rocks, they fortified a small clearing. A central bonfire was lit, and each member took a position, weapons at the ready. The haunting cries of Bigfoot echoed from all sides. The first assault was swift. A massive Bigfoot lunged from the darkness, eyes glinting with rage. Alex, the daredevil, swung a burning branch, keeping it at bay. Lara, atop a boulder, launched arrows, each finding its mark. It seemed they might fend them off, but more shadows advanced, their roars piercing the night. The crew fought with a desperate ferocity, each knowing their survival was at stake. Jackson, using his flare gun, ignited a cluster of trees, creating a temporary barrier. Reed and Arya worked side by side, their combined strength repelling any Bigfoot that dared get too close. But for every creature they downed, two more seemed to take its place. From the trees, the Bigfoot threw massive rocks, breaking their fortifications. The crew was tiring, their energy waning. And that's when it happened. A scream echoed. Lara, their sharpshooter, was snatched by a colossal Bigfoot, its hand clamped over her mouth, silencing her protests. The group watched in horror as she was dragged into the shadows. "No!" Arya screamed, attempting to rush forward, but Reed held her back. "We can't lose you two," he murmured. The crew's morale plummeted. Their defenses were weakening, the continuous onslaught taking its toll. The situation was grim, but in the midst of despair, a glimmer of hope emerged. From the darkness, a group of figures appeared. At first, they seemed like more apparitions, but as they neared, their identity became clear. The villagers, the remnants of the destroyed settlement, had come to their aid. Led by the old Native American, Nahini, they chanted, their voices forming a powerful harmony. The Bigfoot hesitated, seemingly confused. Using this distraction, the villagers launched a counterattack, using ancient weapons and tactics. Nahini approached Arya and Reed, handing them a ceremonial dagger. "Save your friend," he urged. "We will hold them off." The duo, using the cover provided by the villagers, infiltrated the forest, tracking the Bigfoot that had taken Lara. They finally found her, tied to a tree, the creature seemingly prepping her for a ritual. Arya, her heart pounding, signaled to Reed. They needed to be stealthy. Timing was everything. As one Bigfoot began the ritualistic chant, Reed hurled a rock in the opposite direction. The creatures were momentarily distracted, allowing Arya to free Lara. But as they retreated, a massive Bigfoot, its fur darker than the rest, approached them. It was the leader. With a roar, it charged, but Reed, standing his ground, plunged the ceremonial dagger into its heart. It crumpled, the forest falling silent. When they returned to the clearing, they found the villagers victorious, the remaining Bigfoot retreating into the depths of the forest. Nahini, his face streaked with ash and sweat, approached them. "The pact is restored," he said. "For now." As dawn broke, the crew, weary but alive, ventured forth from the cursed forest. The mountains beckoned, signaling safety. They had faced unimaginable horrors, but through unity and sacrifice, had emerged triumphant. And as they looked back, the forest, with all its mysteries and terrors, seemed to fade away, as if it was all just a dark dream. But the scars and memories would forever remain, a testament to their harrowing journey. Chapter 18. The negotiation. The piercing cries of the forest had finally ceased, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. The crew, worn and wounded, sought refuge in a natural alcove shielded by towering ferns. The realization of Laura's abduction hung over them like a suffocating shroud. In the flickering glow of a fire, Arya's voice, laden with desperation, pierced the stillness. "We can't leave her. Not after everything." Jackson, tending to his injuries, grimly shook his head. "You saw that thing. It's the Alpha, the leader. We won't get her back by force." Reed, deep in thought, spoke up. "There might be another way." "We've fought them, but have we tried communicating?" Alex, the skeptic of the group, scoffed. "They're monsters. Beasts. What language do you think they speak?" Arya cut in, determination burning in her eyes. "We have to try. For Laura." It was Naomi, the youngest, who volunteered. Gifted with an uncanny ability to understand and be understood, she felt an intrinsic connection with nature. "I can try to connect with them," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. The crew, having nothing to lose, agreed. At the break of dawn, armed with a white flag, symbolic offerings, and courage that belied her years, Naomi approached the territory of the Bigfoot. The dense forest, previously hostile, seemed to sense her intentions, offering a clear path. As she reached a clearing, she was met by a sight that would be forever etched in her memory. Surrounded by the massive creatures, Laura, bound but defiant, met her gaze, a plea in her eyes. Summoning strength, Naomi began her negotiation. Using slow, deliberate movements, she presented the offerings, a blend of rare herbs, shiny trinkets, and food, a gesture of peace. The Bigfoot watched, intrigued but cautious. As minutes turned into hours, a palpable connection formed. Naomi, tapping into an ancient rhythm, began a dance, a tribute to their shared world. The Bigfoot, in response, emitted haunting melodies, acknowledging the bridge being built. Then came the moment of truth. Pointing to Laura and then to the path they had come from, Naomi pleaded for her release. The Alpha, its presence overpowering, approached. Its gaze, no longer filled with rage, bore a depth of understanding. But it was clear, a trade was required. In a heart-wrenching moment, Naomi realized the sacrifice they demanded. Not food, not trinkets, but something far more precious. Her. With tears in her eyes, she approached Laura, unbinding her. The message was clear: go. Laura, disbelief evident, shook her head frantically. I can't leave you. Naomi, her voice firm, replied, you must. For the crew. For all of us. As the crew, watching from a distance, saw Laura emerge from the forest, relief washed over them. But it was short-lived, replaced by a soul-crushing despair as they realized the cost. The forest, with its secrets and souls, swallowed Naomi, who had become the bridge between two worlds, ensuring the survival of her crew but at a price that would forever haunt their dreams. In the days that followed, the crew would navigate their way out of the cursed forest, their journey marked not by the horrors they faced, but by the sacrifices made. And as they emerged into the world beyond, they carried with them a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the undeniable truth that sometimes, communication could be the most potent weapon of all. Chapter 19. Out of the woods, into the fire, the muted gold of the dawn played a sharp contrast to the weary, ragged crew emerging from the dark expanse of the forest. The world outside seemed foreign, too bright, too loud, but most importantly, safe. Yet, as the group limped onward, their anticipation of relief was abruptly halted by the blaring sirens and flashing lights of police vehicles. Yellow tapes marked the periphery, while news vans, reporters, and anxious families flocked nearby, having camped out for days awaiting any sign of the missing bikers. "We made it," Laura whispered, her voice cracking, a mixture of pain and disbelief evident in her tone. Det. Mitchell, a grizzled officer known for his no-nonsense demeanor, approached the group with caution. "Finally. We'd started to give you up for lost." Arya, her eyes scanning the crowd, desperately searched for familiar faces, her siblings who she knew would be waiting. But before any heartfelt reunion could occur, the group was swiftly quarantined, ushered into makeshift tents for immediate medical attention and debriefing. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Skepticism clouded the office's faces as the crew recounted the horrors they'd faced: the menacing Bigfoot, the whispering trees, the destroyed village, Naomi's haunting sacrifice. "You expect us to believe this fairy tale?" Det. Mitchell's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Bigfoot? Really? Next, you'll say you found a unicorn." Jackson, frustration evident, shot back, "You think we did this to ourselves? Look at our wounds, our state. We lost Naomi in there." However, their claims were met with more disbelief than compassion. Hours turned into days as the relentless interrogation continued, the bikers retelling their harrowing experience, praying for someone to believe them. Outside, the world had become a media circus. Speculations were rife. Everything from drug-induced hallucinations to elaborate hoaxes were proposed. The crew, once thrilled at their survival, now found themselves thrust into an unending nightmare, their trauma dissected and trivialized for public consumption. One evening, Reed, gazing out of the tent, caught sight of a familiar figure. The elder from the village stood at the forest's edge, his expression unreadable. A silent nod passed between them, a shared understanding of the secrets the forest held. After what felt like an eternity, the crew, now deemed physically fit and having given enough statements, were released. As they collected their belongings, a news report played in the background. In other news, satellite images have identified previously unknown clearings deep within the forest, matching descriptions provided by the survivors. Experts remain baffled by these findings. The crew exchanged weary glances, vindicated but too drained to feel triumphant. As they exited, a chilling wind swept over them. Distantly, on a hill shadowing the forest, stood the unmistakable silhouette of Bigfoot, a somber reminder that their ordeal, though behind them, was far from over. Alex, his voice barely audible, murmured, "It's a warning. They're watching. They'll always be watching." The crew, bound together by their harrowing experience, left with heavy hearts, knowing they were the bearers of a haunting truth, a truth the world was unprepared to face. The forest, with its dark canopy and whispering trees, continued to stand tall and foreboding. An emblem of ancient mysteries, untold horrors, and a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who dared to venture within, and lived to tell the tale. Chapter 20. The Last Stand. Arrowhead Spring, a legendary oasis hidden deep within the forest, had been spoken of in hushed voices by locals for generations. Named after the large, sharp-edged stones that littered its banks, the spring had been believed to be a place of power, where the lines between our world and the unseen were gossamer thin. The remaining crew members, carrying the weight of their losses and the burden of their nightmarish journey, gazed at the spring with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The pristine water shimmered under the moonlight, reflecting the canopy of stars above. The air was charged with a sense of anticipation, as if the very trees were holding their breath. Reed, having consulted the elder's map and combined it with his own research, began directing the crew. "We need to set up the offering, just as the legends dictate. It's our best shot." With urgency, the crew began arranging the items, each carrying significant symbolic weight, in a precise formation around the spring. A ring of ancient coins, a medallion that once belonged to the elder, a feather from a golden eagle, and finally, a chalice filled with water from the spring itself. While they prepared, Arya began softly humming a tune that she recalled from her childhood, passed down through generations. It was said to be a song of peace, an ode to the spirits of the forest. Others slowly joined in, their voices filling the night with a haunting melody. Lara, her eyes scanning the dense tree line, whispered to Alex, "Do you think this will work? What if it just angers them more?" Before Alex could answer, a low, guttural growl echoed, silencing their song and causing a palpable shift in the atmosphere. From the tree line, emerging like phantoms, came the Bigfoot, their enormous forms cast in silhouette against the moonlight, their eyes a glowing amber. Their sheer number was staggering, a testament to their dominance in these woods. Jackson, his voice barely above a whisper, urged, "Keep singing. Don't break the circle." But as the Bigfoot closed in, it became evident that this was not just a mere confrontation. They moved with purpose, their focus on the chalice in the center of the offerings. Suddenly, a massive Bigfoot, larger than the rest and carrying an air of authority, stepped forward. With a piercing gaze, it locked eyes with Reed. The world seemed to pause. With a deep breath, Reed addressed the creature. "We seek peace. We recognize our mistakes and the pain we've caused. This offering is a token of our sincerity." In a gesture of trust, Reed slowly approached the chalice, lifting it in an offering stance. The Bigfoot leader, after what felt like an eternity, stepped forward, its massive hand outstretched. The moment their hands met, an ethereal glow enveloped the spring. The atmosphere grew thick with an energy, a primal force that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the forest itself. The glow intensified, blinding in its brilliance, and then, just as suddenly, it receded. The Bigfoot, including their leader, now stood still, their expressions inscrutable. The forest echoed with a symphony of night creatures, as if life had resumed its course. But the question lingered, had the ritual worked? Alex, his voice shaky, broke the silence. "Is it over?" But before anyone could respond, a cacophony erupted. Birds took to the skies, their alarmed cries piercing the night. The water in the spring began to churn and bubble, and the earth trembled beneath their feet. Lara screamed, "Look!" pointing to the trees which now seemed alive, their branches twisting and reaching out as if in agony. The Bigfoot let out roars of what sounded like anguish, their eyes now a deep shade of red. The crew, panic overtaking them, clung to each other, realizing the gravity of their miscalculation. The ritual, rather than appeasing, had perhaps unlocked a force they couldn't comprehend. The Bigfoot leader, its gaze now fixed on the crew, took a menacing step forward. But then, from the forest came a new sound, a hauntingly beautiful song, identical to the one Arya had started. From the darkness emerged the elder, his arms raised in a plea to the angered creatures. The song, carrying the weight of centuries of lore, seemed to resonate with the Bigfoot. One by one, they retreated into the shadows, leaving behind a shaken crew and a forest forever altered. The elder, his gaze weary, addressed the crew. "You've tampered with forces older than time. The pact is broken, but the forest will endure. Leave now, and never return." As dawn broke, casting a gentle glow over Arrowhead Spring, the crew made their way out of the woods. Their journey had come full circle, but the scars, both seen and unseen, would remain. The finality of the elder's words weighed heavily on their minds. The forest, with its mysteries and ancient power, would continue its eternal dance, long after their footprints had faded. And as the sun cast its first rays, one question remained unanswered, echoing in the hearts of all who dared to venture into the woods. Had they truly escaped the wrath of the Bigfoot, or was the true horror still waiting to unfold? We hope you have enjoyed our storytelling offering tonight. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be alerted of future weekly additions to our collections. Paranormal Untold Stories.